So, for this segment of Ask the Expert, I'm here with Stephen Rolfe, Director of Policy and Planning for Indwell here at the Perkins Centre in Hamilton, Ontario. Thank you, Stephen, for your
Thank you.
time. Can you describe your role and how the social determinants of health have informed the work that you do here?
Well, my background is in nursing. I would say that I discovered the social determinants of health when I was working from St. Joseph's Healthcare in mental health outreach, and I had a case management role. And it was through that role that I actually discovered the importance of housing and its relationship to health and wellness for people recovering from mental illness. And quite often I was finding that the problems of finding housing and food and keeping afloat economically, finding friends, other things to do, was more of a challenge perhaps than struggling with symptoms of an illness or dealing with the effects of medication. So housing in particular grabbed onto me because quite often my job was helping people to find it. And it was a difficult job to help people to find adequate housing that they could afford and with supports that would help people be successful. So I suppose that passion led me to where I am now. So I work for Indwell, and we are a nonprofit organization, charity that develops affordable housing for people who are coming out of homelessness. Many of the people that we work with have a history of mental illness, instability in their housing. And so our role is to create affordable housing spaces, offer them at rates that people can afford to pay based on their income, and to provide ongoing supports that help people stay there. And we currently operate 250 units of housing in Hamilton and Woodstock area, but we also have a number of projects on the go so that within the next 3 years we'll be working with over 440 people. My role is overall assistance with improving and developing programs. So I do a lot of work on evaluation and measurement, look at trending, look at future services, what might be required to help people along or help people remain housed. I help the organization with strategic planning, and I work with a really, really great team, and the team actually is what really achieves the mission, which is building housing.
Fantastic. So, something I wanted to ask you about, we all understand that housing is indeed a necessity of life, and yet we are experiencing a housing crisis. I think that's safe to say about Hamilton, but perhaps even nationally in Canada. In the readings, students will have uncovered some of the possible reasons and rationale for this crisis, but what have you experienced in your own setting, in your own work experience?
I think if you look at the overall trend, probably from the late 80s through the present time, there are a number of different touchstone events that you could point to. One of them would be the ending of the National Housing Program in the early 90s, and it was Jack Layton who actually published a wonderful piece of work about his thoughts on the causes of homelessness. And some of those we've certainly picked up on, which is really almost, if you wanted to put it down to a specific kind of issue, it's a physical issue. It's a physical space issue. There's a lack of available affordable housing. If you also look at local literature and different communities, you'll see that a fair number of the existing social housing, some of the contracts that existed for those projects is coming up. So, and many of those housing units are in poor repair. So overall, you're looking at some challenges with available housing stock, challenges with keeping that housing stock in good condition, and challenges with keeping that housing stock available to people as people move on. And then the number of people that are looking for that kind of housing. And we know that wait lists across this province are quite lengthy. And you could look at income as a factor, and certainly the cost of rent. So market rent in Hamilton right now, I believe CMHC has it at around $780 per unit for market rent. And if you look at a person who is experiencing a disability in Ontario on ODSP, their housing allowance is $479. So it's not difficult to imagine how hard it would be to make your rent when you've got an existing $300 to $400 shortfall. And where you borrow that money from is from the money that's given to you for things like food. So how homelessness in and of itself is an economic problem, it's a supply problem, it's an income problem. And communities are challenged to find ways of keeping up with the demand for creating housing stock. Actually, once people find affordable housing, certainly it's true of us, once people move into our buildings, for example, they tend not to move. So once people find housing that they're happy with, they don't move. Those units don't turn over. And so the next person that comes along who needs affordable housing, they're looking at a fairly long waiting list with very low turnover rates. And so that's why you end up with large numbers of people in line. Okay.
Well, thank you for that explanation. So once again, Stephen, thanks so much for your time. It's interesting, as part-time faculty, assistant clinical faculty, you actually have nursing students come to the Perkins Center and learn a little bit about upstream thinking and the determinants of health. Can you provide us with 2 or 3 key messages that you think future nurses should keep in mind as it relates to the determinants of health?
Sure. I think the first one builds off of what Bill was telling us in his apartment. And the thing that I'm mindful of is that everybody has a story. And if you're a beginning practitioner, it's easy to get caught up in other things. And I always try and help students focus on the fact that everybody has a story. And that story tells you a lot about the impact of the basic things of living on people's health and wellness, but it also gives you insights into what assets people have and the strengths that people have and that they bring. And I think it's something that you find surprising if your clinical training is confined to a hospital or your experience of professional practice is confined to an institution. It's easy to forget the assets that people have, and so when you're in community, you see people living in their context. They're living where they're at, and what you discover is that once people have the basics down, and as Bill said, I can afford to pay for my housing, I can do other things, and other things tend to surprise some people. We have a community kitchen in the Perkins Center, and initially when we put the community kitchen together, the idea was to run it as a staff activity. So staff would organize the activity and gather tenants, and they would participate and learn how to cook. And within very short order, it became very apparent that the tenants who were participating could basically say, well, you know what, we've got this, we know how to do this. Thank you, go do something else. And I think that's something that as a practitioner you're going to grapple with, that you're not the solution to every problem, that you're in a position to walk alongside people, but you're not leading people along. And so focus on developing relationships. Relationships with community are just as vital as relationships with individuals at the bedside. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about Kim's Garden. Mm-hmm. So if I wanted to put something together on the importance of having a place, I think Kim's Gardens is a pretty good story. So Kim is the name of a person who moved in here shortly after it opened in September 2011. And up until that time, this person had lived a very disconnected life. Homeless for most of her time here. She had come from a different country, no family here, experiencing mental illness to a great degree. And so coming here, this became the first opportunity for Kim to actually find place. And Kim was able to actually connect with a family physician. These are good things. You're able to connect with clinical services, you're able to get treatment. It's great. Unfortunately, it underlines what happens when you go for long periods of time without having access to those services, or without having access to stable housing, regular food, social networks. And Kim unfortunately developed a terminal illness and passed away very quickly last year. And I think what struck me about that event was that in that short time, she had developed a considerable community around her. And at the memorial service for Kim, the leader of the service basically indicated that we were bearing witness to a life lived. And without housing, without a place, without people that know us regularly and know us by name, those are the things that verify that we're alive. Those are the things that let or bear witness to the fact that we've lived. And so I would say the social determinants of health are more than a list on a page. It's the foundation to living. And when you have a good foundation, living is better than without that foundation.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. On that note, we will reflect on your thoughts around housing, a foundation, assets, more than just material assets, but what people give in terms of their community and sense of belonging. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.